the soldier who was left behind and didn't know the war was over. What would you do if you spent 3 decades fighting a war that ended years ago and no one told you? This isn't a movie plot. This is the true story of Hiroo Onoda, the Japanese soldier who refused to surrender because he never believed the war was over. In the dense jungles of the Philippine island of Lubang, while the world moved forward into an era of peace and prosperity, one man remained frozen in time, fighting a war that had ended decades earlier. His name was Hiroo Onoda, and his story is both a testament to human resilience and a haunting reminder of how war can distort reality itself. Hit that subscribe button, because today on Utak Diaries, we're diving into one of the strangest true tales in military history. Hiroo Onoda was born in Japan in 1922, during a time when his nation was rapidly. As a young man, he was trained as an intelligence officer, learning reconnaissance, guerrilla warfare, and survival. These skills would serve him far longer than anyone could have imagined. By 1944, Onoda found himself stationed on the Philippine island of Lubang, a strategic location that would become both his battlefield and his prison for the next 3 decades. His orders were crystal clear: never surrender, never take his own life, always carry out guerrilla warfare until the Japanese army returned for him. These weren't mere suggestions, they were sacred commands that would echo in his mind for years to come. The atomic bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in August 1945 brought the war to a sudden end. Emperor Hirohito announced Japan's surrender on August 15, 1945. The world celebrated peace, soldiers laid down their arms, and humanity began rebuilding from the most destructive conflict in history. But no one told Onoda, deep in the jungle, cut off from reliable communication, the young intelligence officer never received the message that would have changed everything. When surrender announcements did reach him through dropped leaflets and radio broadcasts, he dismissed them as enemy propagandics, exactly what his training had taught him to expect. Intelligence officers were specifically warned about such psychological warfare tactics. In Onoda's mind, the surrender announcements were proof that his mission was more important than ever. So he disappeared deeper into the jungle, burning rice fields, ambushing villagers he believed were collaborators, and remaining absolutely loyal to an empire that no longer existed. For years after the war's end, Philippine and U.S. forces made concerted efforts to locate remaining Japanese soldiers. They dropped leaflets, broadcast messages in Japanese, and sent search parties into the jungle. The messages were clear. The war was over. Japan had surrendered, and soldiers could come out safely. But Onoda saw these efforts as sophisticated psychological operations. Every leaflet was examined for forgery. Every broadcast analyzed for deception. His training had taught him to question everything. He wasn't alone initially. Other Japanese soldiers had also dismissed the surrender news as enemy trickery. They formed a small band of holdouts, surviving off the land while continuing their perceived mission. But one by one, Onoda's companions left. Some were killed in skirmishes, others surrendered or attempted to return home. Each departure challenged the foundation of his beliefs. By 1950, his last remaining comrade gave up, leaving Onoda increasingly isolated. Yet he persevered with superhuman determination. In 1959, he was declared legally dead in Japan, his family holding funeral services for a son they assumed had perished in the war. Still, Onoda remained hidden, surviving on bananas, coconuts, and stolen rice. His uniform rotted away, his equipment deteriorated, but he maintained his rifle with religious devotion. The world around him transformed. Television became commonplace. The Cold War emerged. Rock and roll revolutionized culture. Space exploration captured imaginations. But for Hiroo Onoda, Time had stopped in 1944. In 1974, a young Japanese adventurer named Norio Suzuki set himself an unusual goal: find Lieutenant Onoda, a panda, and the abominable snowman. Suzuki's approach was refreshingly direct. He simply traveled to Lubang as a tourist and began exploring the jungle. Within weeks, Suzuki achieved what military forces had failed to accomplish for nearly 3 decades. The meeting between the young adventurer and the aging soldier was surreal, a collision between two completely different worlds. Suzuki represented modern Japan, prosperous and peaceful. Onoda embodied the Japan of the 1940s, still fighting a war that had ended before Suzuki was born. But even this encounter wasn't enough to end Onoda's vigil. When Suzuki explained that the war had been over for decades, Onoda listened politely but remained unconvinced. His training and deeply ingrained sense of duty created an impenetrable barrier to accepting this new reality. Onoda's response revealed the depth of his conditioning. He would only surrender if he received direct orders from his commanding officer. This wasn't stubbornness. It was the logical conclusion of a worldview built entirely around military hierarchy and absolute obedience. The Japanese government launched an intensive search for Major Yoshimi, eventually locating him working as a bookseller. The contrast between the two men's post-war experiences was stark. While Onoda had spent 3 decades maintaining his military bearing in the jungle, Taniguchi had adapted to peacetime, building a new life in transformed Japan. When Taniguchi finally arrived on Lubang in March 1974, the scene was both poignant and absurd. Here was an elderly bookseller, dressed in civilian clothes, preparing to formally end a war that had concluded nearly 30 years earlier. The formal surrender ceremony was brief but emotionally charged. Major Taniguchi officially relieved Lieutenant Onoda of his duties and ordered him to cease all combat operations. With those words, Onoda's war finally ended. He handed over his rifle, ammunition, and sword artifacts of a conflict that had continued to rage in one man's mind long after the rest of humanity had moved on. Onoda's return to Japan created a media sensation. Here was a living relic from the war, a man who had emerged from the jungle like a character from legend. The Japanese public was fascinated, seeing in him both a symbol of unwavering loyalty and a reminder of the devastating costs of rigid adherence to duty. The reception was complex. Many hailed him as a hero whose loyalty represented the best qualities of the Japanese spirit. Others questioned the violence he had committed during his jungle years, killing civilians and destroying property long after any military justification had ended. For Onoda, the return was profoundly disruptive. The Japan he had left in 1944 was a militaristic empire, a total war. The Japan he returned to in 1974 was almost unrecognizable, a peaceful democracy, an economic powerhouse focused on prosperity rather than military glory. Tokyo epitomized the transformation. The city he remembered had been largely destroyed by bombing raids. The Tokyo he encountered was a gleaming metropolis of steel and glass, neon lights, and bustling crowds. The psychological adjustment was perhaps even more challenging than the physical one. Onoda had to grapple with the realization that his entire adult life had been based on a fundamental misunderstanding of reality. Eventually, finding it impossible to fully adapt to modern Japanese society, Onoda emigrated to Brazil, where he found new purpose raising cattle. The move represented an acknowledgement that some gaps cannot be bridged, that some experiences create unbridgeable chasms between individuals and their societies. Later in life, Onoda did return to Japan, found in a school dedicated to teaching survival skills and resilience to young people. He shared the practical knowledge gained during his decades in the jungle. while imparting lessons about perseverance and the importance of maintaining principles even in the face of overwhelming adversity. Hiroo Onoda's story is both inspiring and tragic, resisting simple interpretation. On one hand, he represents the power of human conviction and the extraordinary lengths individuals will go to honor their commitments. His 30-year vigil stands as a testament to the strength of the human spirit and the capacity for endurance in seemingly impossible circumstances. At the same time, his story serves as a cautionary tale about the dangers of blind obedience and the importance of maintaining critical thinking and moral judgment. Onoda's absolute adherence to his orders led him to commit acts of violence against innocent people long after any legitimate military purpose had ended. The tragedy lies not just in the 30 years he lost to a war that had already ended, but in how war can distort human perception and moral reasoning. His experience demonstrates how extreme circumstances can create psychological frameworks that trap individuals in patterns of thought and behavior that eventually become counterproductive or harmful. His story raises profound questions about the nature of duty and obligation in complex moral situations. What is duty when the cause it was meant to serve no longer exists? How far should obedience extend? And at what point does loyalty become a vice rather than a virtue? Perhaps most importantly, Onoda's experience highlights the challenges faced by individuals who become disconnected from their societies and the support systems that help us navigate moral and practical complexities. His isolation was not just physical but intellectual and emotional, cutting him off from the ongoing conversations and evolving understandings that help societies adapt to changing circumstances. In the end, Hiroo Onoda's story transcends its specific historical context to become a meditation on fundamental questions of human existence. How do we balance loyalty with wisdom? How do we maintain our principles while remaining open to new information and changing circumstances? How do we honor our commitments while avoiding the trap of blind obedience? For 29 years, one man lived in a war that no longer existed, because no one told him it had ended. Hiroo Onoda didn't surrender until the world came to him, carrying news that would finally set him free from a prison of his own unwavering conviction. His story stands as one of the most remarkable tales of human endurance ever recorded, a reminder of both the power and the peril of absolute faith in a world. Truth itself can be more complex and elusive than we might wish to believe. Like, subscribe, and follow Utak Diaries for more mind-blowing true stories from the pages of forgotten history.